In this video series, we are using the structure of the Zeptoform. In this chapter, the Zeptoform is used to integrate physics, music theory, and personality type theory. As discussed in the introduction, one of the main topics of the Zeptoform theory is isomorphism. Isomorphism is a similarity of form. It is a one-to-one correspondence between the elements of two or more groups. The Zeptoform is used to see various kinds of isomorphism in the universe, and it enables us to apply the knowledge of one field to many other fields. For example, by finding the isomorphism between elementary particles and personality types, we will be able to use the knowledge of particle physics for analyzing personality types, and vice versa. In this way, we can build bridges between many different fields. In addition to the isomorphism between elementary particles and personality types, we also discuss the isomorphism between musical notes and personality types. This is the integration of particle physics, music theory, and personality type theory. Consequently, we will be able to use the knowledge of any of these fields to analyze the other fields.
Note:
As already discussed, in this chapter, we use the Zeptoform in order to integrate physics, music theory, and personality type theory. In order to understand this integration, basic knowledge of the Zeptoform is required. Therefore, if you have not yet watched the first video, we recommend that you do so before you watch this one. Chapter 2, Zeptoformic Physics and Music. Section 1, Symmetry in Music. The 7 notes of the minor scale have a diatonic symmetry, and it corresponds to the symmetry of the Enneagram. That is, according to the law of 7 of the Enneagram theory, the 7 points among the 9 points correspond to the 7 notes of a musical scale. As we can see, there is no black key between point 5 and point 8, separating the thinking center and the instinctive center, and between point 1 and point 4, separating the instinctive center and the feeling center. In this diatonic symmetry, the center of the whole structure is point 9. Point 9 represents the center, or neutrality, of the whole structure. Technically, A minor scale is from A to A. However, in this figure, the latter A is missing. The reason can be explained in the following way. Repeating elements can be divided into 2 different ways, as illustrated. In pattern 1, A, which is one of the repeating elements, is on the dividing line. Therefore, each set of elements has 2 A's. On the other hand, in pattern 2, each set of elements does not contain the same element repeatedly. In music theory, pattern 1 is used to define a musical scale. However, if we use this pattern for a personality type theory, the same personality type appears redundantly in one set of the framework. Therefore, when we make a one-to-one correspondence between musical notes and personality types, we need to use pattern 2.
Tritone.
The interval between B and F is called the tritone, which creates an unstable sound. In order to resolve this dissonance, B needs to be moved to C, and F needs to be moved to E. Related to this phenomenon, the process from type 5 to type 8, and from type 4 to type 1, are integration processes. On the other hand, when B moves to A and F moves to G, an unpleasant sound is created. Related to this phenomenon, the process from type 5 to type 7, and from type 4 to type 2, are disintegration processes. A musical scale is divided into 6 tones. One tone is composed of 2 semitones, and thus there are 12 semitones, as illustrated. A tritone, as a musical interval, is composed of 3 tones. If we consider only white keys in the diatonic scale, there is only 1 tritone for each octave. A tritone creates an unstable sound, which causes us to desire to create the next sound to resolve this dissonance, creating the next movement. Because a tritone creates unstable feelings, it is also called the devil's interval. From here, the structural transformation from the Enneagram to the Zeptoform will be discussed from the perspective of music theory. First of all, the structure of the Enneagram, which is represented by the A minor scale, needs to be transformed to the C major scale, as illustrated. Now, in the C major scale, we can see the three hierarchical levels of thinking, feeling, and instinctive. Then, point 1 moves up from the instinctive level to the thinking level. This is called CP violation, as discussed in the previous video. As we have seen, the transformation from the Enneagram to the Zeptoform is represented by the transformation from the minor scale to the major scale. In the minor scale and the major scale, the algorithm of the Enneagram theory is different. For example, in the minor scale, the process from point 1 to point 7 is the process from E to A, but in the major scale, that is from G to A. In other words, in the Enneagram system and the Zeptoform system, the same process can create different music. In the Zeptoform theory, some processes are added to the traditional Enneagram theory, as discussed in the previous chapter. Now, in order to compose music, we use only integration processes. As already discussed, in the Zeptoform theory, the integration processes in this figure are added to the traditional Enneagram theory. The processes in this figure are all integration processes. 2 of them are not included in the traditional Enneagram theory. By converting this structure from the Enneagram to the Zeptoform, concentric double circles emerge. As we can see in this figure, the 2 circular processes have opposite directions. One is clockwise, and the other is counterclockwise, and this algorithmic structure can be played as music. As already discussed, the transformation from the Enneagram to the Zeptoform is represented by the transformation from the minor scale to the major scale. In this transformation process, the right-left symmetry of the keyboard is violated, as illustrated. This violation of symmetry represents the violation of CP symmetry. Point 1 further moves up to the supreme vertex, as illustrated. In the thinking center, we can see the following connection. There is the process from point 1 to point 7, to point 5, to point 3, and to point 1, as illustrated. This algorithmic process was discussed in the previous video. When point 1 moves up to the supreme vertex, a new symmetry emerges, as illustrated. There is the right-left symmetry of the keyboard. A tritone is also included in this symmetrical structure. A tritone creates an unstable sound, as discussed previously. In order to resolve this dissonance, F needs to be moved to E, and B needs to be moved to C, as illustrated. Related to this pattern, the process from type 2 to type 4, as well as the process from type 5 to type 3, is an integration process.
Note:
The process from type 5 to type 3 is not included in the traditional Enneagram theory. When F moves to G and B moves to A, an unpleasant sound is created. Related to this pattern, the process from type 2 to type 1, as well as the process from type 5 to type 7, is a disintegration process.
Note:
The process from type 2 to type 1 is not included in the traditional Enneagram theory. In this figure, C is represented by two different points, point 8 and point 3, that is, because the functioning mode of point 3 is intrinsically connected to the quality of point 8. Point 3 also represents the quality of C. As discussed previously, in the case of the A minor scale, pattern 2 is used to make the one-to-one correspondence between musical notes and personality types in order to avoid redundancy. But, in the case of the C major scale, C is repeated twice without redundancy of the same personality type because C is represented by two different types, type 8 and type 3. In this figure, on the keyboard, point 9 is located at two different points. They do not represent two exact points, but the harmonious expansion of the field. That will be discussed later.
From horizontal to vertical.
In the minor scale, point 9 is located at the center of the scale, and the tritone is one aspect of the left-right symmetry with respect to the center. However, the tritone causes the violation of the left-right symmetry in the following way. The tritone causes us to desire to create the next sound, which is a stable sound. That is, point 5 moves to point 8, and point 4 moves to point 1, as illustrated. Then, it creates the hierarchical structure, which violates the symmetry, as illustrated. It is the representation of CP violation. The minor scale represents yin, and the major scale represents yang. Related to this, according to the yin-yang principle, a horizontal line represents yin, and a vertical line represents yang.
Note:
The minor scale sounds darker than the major scale. Therefore, the minor scale represents yin, and the major scale represents yang. In the A minor scale, the tritone is represented by the relationship between point 5 and point 4. On the other hand, in the C major scale, the tritone is represented by the relationship between point 2 and point 5. In the Zeptoform theory, the former tritone is called the primordial tritone. The primordial tritone is composed of point 5 and point 4, which have the yin quality, representing non-existence. Then, the first existence is represented by the duality of the beast and God, or point 8 and point 1, which have the yang quality. The quality of yin is static. On the other hand, the quality of yang is dynamic. Therefore, the transformation from the minor scale to the major scale, which represents the transformation from the yin quality to the yang quality, corresponds to the creation process of the universe, and it brings about CP violation. The most basic pattern of the Zeptoform music begins with the primordial tritone. It causes the violation of CP symmetry. That is recorded in this chapter. Chapter 2, Section 2, Symmetry in Physics, Part 1. In this figure, 0 represents emptiness or nothingness. When the universe was created from nothingness, equal amounts of particles and antiparticles were produced. A particle and an antiparticle have exactly the same mass, but they have opposite charges, representing yin and yang. Matter, which represents yang, is composed of particles. On the other hand, antimatter, which represents yin, is composed of antiparticles. This universe is made up of matter, not antimatter. Then, what happened to antimatter? That will be discussed in this section, in conjunction with personality types.
Note:
Antimatter is different from dark matter. The isomorphism between dark matter and personality types will be discussed in Section 9. Particles as well as antiparticles are categorized into fermions and bosons, as illustrated. Fermions are material particles, and bosons are force carrier particles. The gravitational force and the electromagnetic force, for example, are caused by force carrier particles. The isomorphism between fermions and personality types will be discussed in this section. Then, the isomorphism between bosons and personality types will mainly be discussed in section 4.
3 generations.
Fermions, which are material particles, have 3 generations, as illustrated in this figure. A generation is a set of elementary particles. The first generation is the lightest, and the third generation is the heaviest. The term generation is related to the order of discovering particles. For example, the first generation particles, the lightest particles, were discovered first. As we will see later, this structure will be transformed into that of the Zeptoform.
CP symmetry.
CP symmetry is the combination of C symmetry and P symmetry. It is considered to be a fundamental code of the universe. First, we will discuss C symmetry. Particles and antiparticles have equal and opposite electric charges. Then, because particles and antiparticles were created in equal amounts at the beginning of the universe, there was the symmetry between positive charge and negative charge. It is the creation of C symmetry. C stands for charge conjugation. Next, we will discuss P symmetry. A particle can have the left-handed spin or the right-handed spin, as illustrated. A thumb in the figure represents the direction of traveling. Then, the other 4 fingers represent the direction of spin. At the moment of pair production, a particle and its antiparticle have opposite spins. When a particle has the left-handed spin, its antiparticle has the right-handed spin. When a particle has the right-handed spin, its antiparticle has the left-handed spin. This is one type of P symmetry.
Note:
After the pair production, particles as well as antiparticles constantly flip, left and right as illustrated in this figure. The function of spin will be discussed in section 4. There is another way to illustrate P symmetry. Suppose we take a picture of natural scenery and reverse the right side and the left side of the landscape in that picture, creating a mirror image. In this case, only those who have seen the original scenery can tell if it has been reversed or not. In other words, the laws of physics function in the same way for the left and right, and thus we cannot tell the reversal. This spatial symmetry of right and left is called P symmetry. P stands for parity. We have discussed 2 different types of symmetries, C symmetry and P symmetry. C symmetry is the symmetry of positive charge and negative charge. It can be seen as the symmetry of yin and yang, or yang and yin. On the other hand, P symmetry is the symmetry of left and right. It is the symmetry of space. The combination of C symmetry and P symmetry is considered to be one of the most fundamental codes of reality.
CP violation.
As discussed previously, when the universe was created from nothingness, equal amounts of matter and antimatter were produced. It is the creation of CP symmetry. But, in the next moment of the creation, matter became dominant over antimatter. In other words, the symmetry between matter and antimatter was violated. It is called CP violation, or the violation of CP symmetry. In order to show the mechanism of CP violation, we use the structure of quarks. As already discussed, particles are divided into fermions and bosons. In this section, we are analyzing the isomorphism between fermions and enneatypes. Fermions are categorized into quarks and leptons, as illustrated. Quarks can be considered the core of matter, because the core of an atom is made up of quarks. On the other hand, leptons are not the central components of matter. For example, electrons, which are one type of lepton, are moving around the core. Also, the mass of an electron is negligible compared to the mass of an atom. Therefore, in this section, we focus on quarks. Leptons will be discussed later. Quarks have 6 different types, as illustrated in this figure. Red represents positive charge, and blue represents negative charge. The bottom quark of the 3rd generation can be changed to the up quark of the first generation, as illustrated. At the moment of this generation change, CP violation happens. That is, in order for CP violation to happen, 3 generations must be required. For this theoretical discovery, 3 scientists won the Nobel Prize in Physics. However, some of you might be thinking the following. CP violation is the violation of symmetry between particles and antiparticles. But we discussed only particles, or quarks. So, what is the violation of symmetry between quarks and antiquarks? It can be explained in the following way. As already discussed, the bottom quark is changed to the up quark. Likewise, the anti-bottom quark is changed to the anti-up quark, as illustrated in the right figure. However, these processes are not perfectly symmetrical. There is a frequency gap between these 2 processes. That is the violation of CP symmetry between particles and antiparticles. Also, we can see the following pattern. The CP violation of matter and antimatter is archetypically reflected onto the world of matter. That is, within the world of matter, not between matter and antimatter, there is the violation of symmetry between yin and yang. As we will see in this video series, in this world, in many domains, yang qualities tend to dominate yin qualities. Here is one example. A right hand represents yang, and a left hand represents yin, and many people are right-handed. Also, according to many psychologists, such as Susan Cain, about 2/3 of the people are extroverts. That is, in terms of quantity, extroverts dominate introverts.
Note:
According to MBTI manual, the population of introverts has increased from 1/4 to 1/2. However, this change is superficial. The reason will be explained in Chapter 4. The fundamental pattern of CP violation is represented by this figure. That is, in this figure, positively charged quarks dominate negatively charged quarks. It represents the archetypical pattern of CP violation. Here is another example. A proton, which is the core of an atom, is made up of 2 up quarks and 1 down quark. That is, a proton is made up of the first-generation particles. The up quark has a charge of +2/3, and the down quark has a charge of -1/3, and thus the total charge of a proton is +1. As we can see, within a proton, the yang quality dominates the yin quality. As discussed in this section, C symmetry is the symmetry of yin and yang, or negative charge and positive charge, and it is violated in the universe. Likewise, in the structure of the Zeptoform, C symmetry is violated by point 1. In this figure, the left side represents particles, and the right side represents enneatypes. As illustrated in the right figure, point 1 is changed from introvert to extrovert, or yin to yang. In addition to C symmetry, P symmetry, which is the left-right symmetry, is also violated in both elementary particles and personality types. In the case of personality types, geometrically, the relationship of left and right in the instinctive center is violated by point 1. This figure was discussed in Chapter 1, Section 1. As we can see, point 1 violates CP symmetry by moving up from the instinctive level to the thinking level. Likewise, when the bottom quark of the 3rd generation is transformed into the up quark of the 1st generation, CP violation happens. When this theory in physics was proposed in 1973, only 3 types of quarks had been found. The 3rd generation was missing. In order for this theory to be valid, the 3rd generation needs to exist. By 1995, the other 3 types had been found. The 3rd generation was discovered. For this theory, the Nobel Prize in Physics 2008 was awarded to 3 scientists: Yurichiro Nambu, Toshihide Masukawa, and Makoto Kobayashi.
The meaning of CP violation.
When particles and antiparticles clash with each other, their charges cancel each other out. At the same time, particles and antiparticles disappear. Matter and antimatter cease to exist. Therefore, CP violation is required for this universe to exist. Because of this, Some scientists have said,
CP violation was caused by God's will, in order to create and maintain the universe.
related to this, point 1, which causes CP violation, represents God's will. As discussed in the previous section, in the case of music theory, CP violation is represented by the transformation from the minor scale to the major scale. This transformation will further be analyzed in this chapter. Chapter 2, Section 3, Symmetry in Physics, Part 2. In the structure of the Zeptoform, the arrow of time is represented by the vertical direction. Then, the relationship between the arrow of time and the 3 generations of particles can be analyzed in the following way. Because kinetic energy is proportional to mass, higher energy can produce heavier particles. At the moment of the Big Bang, which has the highest energy density, heavier particles existed stably. But, as the universe expands, the temperature of the universe cools down, and heavier particles disappear. That is, the 3rd generation particles, which are the heaviest, can be considered primordial particles, or extinct particles. This is why it was difficult to find the 3rd generation particles. The top quark is the heaviest of all quarks. It has 0.31 zeptogram, and the diameter is 0.1 zeptometer. As discussed in the introduction, zepto is 1000 to the power of -7. As already discussed, a proton is composed of the 1st generation particles, which are the youngest generation particles. The term generation is related to the order of discovering particles. The 3rd generation particles, heavier particles, were discovered last. But, in the case of excavation, the process of digging, the oldest fossils, which can be discovered last, are considered to be the 1st generation. That is, if the term generation is used in the way of archaeology, the 3rd generation particles are considered to be the 1st generation, and the 1st generation particles are the 3rd, as illustrated. In this way, we can see the consistency between the direction of time and generations. In this figure, the thinking center is illustrated in the Zeptoform. Type 6 is considered to be ambivert, which is the mixture of extrovert and introvert. Then, these qualities are divided into the extrovert of type 7 and the introvert of type 5. The former represents a particle, and the latter represents an antiparticle. Analogically, this structure corresponds to one type of phenomenon in particle physics, that is called pair production. Pair production is related to the creation of CP symmetry. Recall, C symmetry is the symmetry of yin and yang, and P symmetry is the symmetry of right and left. In this figure, the structure of the feeling center is illustrated in the Zeptoform. Type 2 is the extroverted feeling type, and type 4 is the introverted feeling type. Then, these 2 opposite tendencies are offset by each other to create the tendency of type 3. That is, the people with the type 3 personality tend to dissociate from their feelings. As discussed previously, when a particle and an antiparticle collide with each other, both of them disappear. It is called annihilation. Type 3 is considered to be the most out of touch with feelings. Metaphorically, his feelings tend to be annihilated. In this figure, a hypothetical situation of the instinctive center is illustrated in the Zeptoform. That is, if there were no CP violation between point 8 and point 1, the process from point 8 to point 9, and the process from point 1 to point 9 superpose, and thus the instinctive center annihilates entirely. Therefore, the violation of CP symmetry is required for the instinctive center to exist. Because of this CP violation, the instinctive center has a different structure from that of this figure. That will be discussed later. According to particle physics, an antiparticle is going back in time. It is moving toward the past in the flow of time. When the antiparticle reverses its direction to the future, moving toward the future in the flow of time, it reverses its charge, and thus it becomes a particle. From our usual perspective, this reversal can be seen as the moment of pair production. By analogy, the thinking center is illustrated in this figure. The direction of an introverted 5 is moving toward the past. When it reverses its direction to the future, it becomes an extroverted 7. This whole process is illustrated as sequential numbers 5, 6, and 7. By analogy, the feeling center is illustrated in this figure. A particle, which is represented by an extroverted 2, is moving toward the future. When it reverses its direction towards the past, it reverses its charge, and thus it becomes an antiparticle, which is represented by an introverted 4. This whole process is illustrated as sequential numbers 2, 3, and 4. In the instinctive center, there is the violation of CP symmetry, as previously discussed. Because of this violation, there is no reversal of time in the instinctive center, and thus there is no reversal of extrovert and introvert. The out and the in of the instinctive center are both extroverted. Therefore, in this figure, point 8 as well as point 1 represents a particle. Point 1 does not represent an antiparticle. As discussed, in the instinctive center, there is no reversal of time, but in the middle of this center, which is point 9, time stands still, and thus the quality of neutrovert appears.
Note:
Point 6 represents ambivert, and point 9 represents neutrovert. The difference between ambivert and neutrovert will mainly be discussed in Chapter 4. In the process from point 8 to point 9, the quality of extroverted instinct vanishes. Then, the extroverted thinking appears at point 1. Point 1 does not represent an instinctive type, but a thinking type. This transformation from instinct to thinking represents quantum teleportation. Because of this, the process from point 9 to point 1 is not represented by sequential numbers. This teleportation can also be experienced as the teleportation to the supreme vertex, as illustrated. The supreme vertex was discussed in the previous video.
Note:
As discussed, an antiparticle is going back in time. That was claimed by Richard Feynman, who received the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1965.
The perfect symmetry.
In the structure of the Zeptoform, horizontal directions represent the dimension of space, and the vertical direction represents the dimension of time. Because time is represented by the vertical direction, the information about time is represented by height. The out and the in of the thinking center are located at the same height as illustrated. Likewise, the out and the in of the feeling center are also located at the same height as illustrated. In contrast to these two centers, the out and the in of the instinctive center are not located at the same height. That is, in the instinctive center, there is T violation, the violation of time symmetry. In addition to T violation, there is C violation and P violation in the instinctive center, as discussed previously. C symmetry is the symmetry of yin and yang, and point 8 and point 1 are not in the relationship between yang and yin, or extrovert and introvert. They are both extroverted. P symmetry is the symmetry of left and right, and, as we can see, point 8 and point 1 are not in the relationship between left and right. However, these three violations, C violation, P violation, and T violation, compensate for each other in order to maintain the perfect balance in the universe. That is, in terms of totality, the universe has perfect symmetry, and that is called CPT symmetry. C symmetry is the symmetry of yin and yang, P symmetry is the symmetry of space or left and right, and the T symmetry is the symmetry of time. The structure of CPT is considered to be the most fundamental code of reality. According to the CPT theorem, CPT symmetry holds for all physical phenomena in the universe. The perfection of CPT symmetry will be discussed from many different angles in this video series. The essential colors of the Zeptoform can be represented by the horizontal axis and the vertical axis. and this structure represents the perfection of CTP symmetry. In this figure, the color gradation of the vertical axis is created from the accumulation of the colors of the horizontal axis. According to the yin-yang principle, space is represented by the horizontal axis, and time is represented by the vertical axis. The time axis has a color gradation of red, orange, yellow, and clear light. This gradation is obtained by adding the spectrum from red to blue of the space axis. That is, the color gradation of time is created from the color gradation of space. In this relationship, we can see the following two pairs. On the space axis, the opposite side of red is blue. On the time axis, the opposite side of red is clear light. As we can see, on the time axis, the inverse symmetry between yin and yang is violated. That is, red and clear light are both yang. This violation of symmetry is caused by God's will, which is represented by clear light. As already discussed, the instinctive center is changed from a horizontal structure to a vertical structure. That is the transformation from yin to yang. Likewise, in the case of music theory, the transformation from the minor scale to the major scale, which represents CP violation, is the transformation from yin to yang, as already discussed. The minor scale represents yin, and the major scale represents yang. Space without time is static, which is yin, but when the arrow of time is created from space, motion, which is yang, emerges. As we can see, space represents yin, and time represents yang. When the will of God, which is represented by clear light, creates time from space, the motion of the universe emerges.
Question.
Space represents yin, but the left side of the space axis in the figure is not illustrated as yin. It is illustrated as yang. How? Do you explain that? That can be explained in the following way. For example, parents represent yin, and children represent yang. Then, children are created from parents. That is, yang is created from yin. But, in terms of the relationship between a father and a mother, not both of them are yin. Although, a mother represents yin, a father represents yang. A similar relationship can be seen in the relationship between the right and the left of the space axis. In the arrow of time, we can see the following structure. The background of the past is red, and that of the future is blue. Then, the background of the past, which is red, appears in the arrow of time, but that of the future, which is blue, does not appear in the arrow of time, as illustrated. This means that the past is explicit as it has already been experienced, but the future is implicit, as it has not yet been experienced. Yang is explicit, and yin is implicit. As we can see, the past is yang, and the future is yin. But, although the future as blue indicates yin, the future as clear light indicates yang. That is, although we do not have any memory of the future, we can learn many things with the progress of time. We will be able to acquire more knowledge in the future, becoming explicit. In other words, the arrow of time accumulates all colors with the progress of time, and it ultimately becomes clear light. In this context, the future indicates yang. On the other hand, at the bottom of the arrow of time, there is the darkness of infrared. This darkness indicates the state before the sun, or red, rises above the horizon, as well as the unknown elements of the beginning of time. Therefore, in this context, the past indicates yin. The warm color, which indicates yang, has longer wavelengths, and the cool color, which indicates yin, has shorter wavelengths. Clear light includes the whole range of wavelengths, and thus it indicates the totality of yin and yang. However, in terms of darkness and brightness, this totality indicates yang, brightness. That is, in order to embody true perfection, the darkness at the bottom and the brightness at the top need to be integrated. This is a geometrical realization of perfection, and that is called CPT symmetry. CPT symmetry is the combination of C symmetry, P symmetry, and T symmetry. C symmetry is the symmetry of yin and yang. P symmetry is the symmetry of space or left and right, and the T symmetry is the symmetry of time. Because there is CPT symmetry in the universe, when space and time are compressed into a single point, yin and yang in the universe would be totally annihilated. At the same time, the universe itself would be annihilated. This annihilation of totality can be analyzed in the following way. When point 1 goes back in time, the quality of yang is reversed to the yin. Therefore, when space and time are compressed into a single point, the yin and yang of the doing center, or the instinctive center, would be totally annihilated, as indicated by 0. Point 0 not only represents the annihilation of everything, but also the ultimate source from which everything will be created. Then, there is a similarity between point 0 and point 9. That is, point 9 is called the seed, or the seminal point, from which other Ennea points emerge. Almas said,
Traditionally, point 9 is seen as the seminal point in the Enneagram map, in that the other 8 points can be seen as different variations growing out of the experience of point 9. In other words, all other points have implicit within them the ground of point 9.
He also said,
Point 9 forms the center, out of which all the other points on the Enneagram, representing both holy ideas and the Enneatypes, emanate or differentiate.
Related to this, the process from point 9 to point 6 and to point 3 represents the creation process of the universe. It can be described in the following way. As discussed, point 9 is called the seminal point, or the seed. Then, the process from the seed to point 6 represents the pair production of particles and antiparticles. At this moment, the qualities of yin and yang are antagonized. Matter and antimatter were created in equal amounts. Then, the process from point 6 to point 3 represents the violation of the 3 symmetries. That is, first of all, point 1 causes the violation of symmetries as already discussed. Then, point 3 assimilates into point 1, and thus, point 3 also represents the violation of symmetries. This violation represents the dynamic action of the universe. For example, a seesaw does not move when the same weight is applied to both ends of it. But, when the symmetry of the weight is violated, the seesaw begins to move. Point 3 represents this dynamic function of the universe, and it is called the functioning mode. The process from point 9 to point 6 and to point 3 not only represents the process of creating the universe, but also the developmental process of a cell. That was discussed in Chapter 1, Section 6. Recall the following. Point 9 represents the stem cell. That is the earliest stage of a cell. Stem cells have not yet developed their own unique identity, and thus they are all identical. Related to this, Type 9 is described by Riso and Hudson in the following way.
Their sense of self is undefined. Average 9s have little sense of who they are, apart from those they have identified with. They see a little of themselves in all the types. Even relatively healthy 9s still have a somewhat diffused sense of self, because it is based on their capacity to be receptive to others, and to be unself-conscious.
As discussed, stem cells are all identical, but each stem cell has the potential to differentiate into various types of cells. It is called pluripotency. Related to this, as we will see in Chapter 3, the worldview of Type 9 can be seen as the pluralistic worldview. The process from point 9 to point 6 represents the process of cell division. In this process, a stem cell is differentiated into different types of cells. Related to this, according to many Enneagram teachers, the variance among type 6 is the most noticeable. Finally, the process from point 6 to point 3 represents the creation of mature types of cells. Related to this, the process from point 9 to point 6 and to point 3 represents the developmental process of personality. As we have seen, the process from point 9 to point 6 and to point 3 represents many different types of developmental processes. It can be seen as the universal pattern of development. In this process, the violation of CP symmetry happens. As discussed previously, the violation of CP symmetry is required for this universe to exist, and it is represented by the structure of the Zeptoform. Therefore, we can infer that the Zeptoform can be used as the geometrical master archetype for integrating everything in the universe. This geometrical integration of everything is demonstrated in this video series. In this section, we discussed CPT symmetry. The totality of CPT is always zero, and from this zero, everything can be created based on the universal pattern. Chapter 2, Section 4, Forces in Physics, Part 1. In the previous two sections, we discussed the isomorphism between fermions and personality types. Then, in this section, we will find the isomorphism between bosons and personality types.
6 types of bosons.
As illustrated in this figure, bosons as elementary particles have 6 types. These particles are called the graviton, the photon, the gluon, the Z boson, the W boson, and the Higgs boson. The Higgs boson is an exceptional particle. That is, although the Higgs boson is one type of boson, it is not a force carrier particle. It is neither force carrier particle nor material particle. This categorization will be discussed later. The W boson in this figure is illustrated in the blue area. It indicates the negative electric charge of the W boson. As discussed in the previous two sections, a particle and its antiparticle have opposite electric charges. Therefore, the antiparticle of the W boson has positive electric charge. The other 5 types do not have electric charge, and thus, they are exactly the same as their antiforms. This means that we cannot distinguish particles from antiparticles in these cases.
The gravitational force and the inertial resistance.
The graviton is represented by point 7, and the Higgs particle is represented by point 8, as illustrated. The graviton, or the gravitational field, produces gravitational mass. On the other hand, the Higgs particles, or the Higgs field, produces inertial mass. Gravitational mass is measured by the gravitational force between objects. It is the attraction between objects. On the other hand, inertial mass is measured by its resistance to acceleration. It is the resistance to the change of the velocity of an object. Although gravitational mass and inertial mass are different, according to the equivalence principle, the gravitational mass and the inertial mass of any object are equal. That was demonstrated by Galileo Galilei. It is said that he dropped 2 balls of different masses from the top of the Leaning Tower of Pisa. At the time, the majority of people thought that heavier objects fell faster than lighter objects because of gravitational mass. But the balls fell at the same speed and hit the ground at the same time because of inertial mass. That is, as an object gets heavier, the resistance to acceleration becomes greater, and the 2 masses, the gravitational mass and the inertial mass, create the perfect balance. As already discussed, the relationship between the graviton and the Higgs particle is represented by the relationship between type 7 and type 8. Because the graviton itself does not have mass, it can travel freely at the speed of light. It can be seen as a characteristic of type 7. On the other hand, because the Higgs particle has the heaviest mass among the 6 bosons, it symbolizes the grounding to the Earth. It can be seen as a characteristic of type 8.
Note:
As discussed in Chapter 1, both type 7 and type 8 are action types. According to the standard model of particle physics, every elementary particle, except the Higgs particle, has spin. There is left-handed spin and right-handed spin, as illustrated. The spin of particles constantly flips left and right, as illustrated. This pattern is caused by the Higgs field, and it creates inertia. From here, the mechanism of inertia will be described, step by step. First of all, the Higgs field creates Higgs particles. Then, each Higgs particle decays into a particle and its anti-form. When a particle has right-handed spin, its anti-form has left-handed spin. When a particle has left-handed spin, its anti-form has right-handed spin, as illustrated. Then, these particles create new pairs, as illustrated. There is a right-handed pair and a left-handed pair. In each pair, a particle and an antiparticle have opposite directions of traveling, as illustrated. In this way, the net momentum of each pair becomes zero. Both the net momentum in the direction of travel and in the direction of spin become zero. These pairs can create inertia in the following way. First of all, the left-handed antiparticle collides with the right-handed antiparticle, and they annihilate. Because of this annihilation, only the right-handed particle remains. In this process, the left-handed particle is replaced by the right-handed particle, as illustrated. Next, the right-handed particle collides with the left-handed antiparticle, and they annihilate. Because of this annihilation, only the left-handed particle remains. That is, the right-handed particle is replaced by the left-handed particle, as illustrated. In this process, when a particle is replaced by another particle, it does not go straight forward, as illustrated. That is, a particle moves in a zigzag pattern, or random pattern, as illustrated. Therefore, the total speed to the initial direction decreases. In this way, a particle acquires inertial mass.
Note:
When a heavy object is moving, it is difficult to stop it because of inertia. That is a characteristic of type 8. That is, in some situations, type 8 is unstoppable. Massless particles, such as photons, do not interact with the Higgs field, and thus they do not change their spin. Left-handed photons are always left-handed, and right-handed photons are always right-handed, as illustrated. According to Einstein's relativity theory, the faster an object moves, the slower time passes. Ultimately, when the speed of an object reaches the speed of light, time stands still. When time stands still, change does not happen. The photon is traveling at the speed of light. Therefore, it does not experience any change, including the change of its spin. The photon is represented by point 1, and the holy idea of point 1 is holy perfection. Perfection indicates completeness, and thus it indicates the end of any process. That is the state of stillness. Brilliancy, which is the main essential quality of type 1, is the essence of perfection. Because of this, Alma said,
"Brilliancy is a presence that slows time to a standstill. When time stops, we experience timelessness, and the presence is pure and complete. The luminosity and magnificence of brilliancy is the exquisite perfection of presence without time. That is why, the full experience of brilliancy is the experience of timelessness."
The mass of any elementary particle is considered to be inertial mass. In this figure, the Higgs field is represented by red. The Higgs particle is directly produced from the Higgs field, and thus it has the heaviest mass among the 6 bosons. The Z boson and W boson interact with the Higgs field, and thus they acquire mass. These two particles, Z and W, have almost equal masses. The graviton, photon, and gluon do not interact with the Higgs field, and thus they do not have mass. As we can see, the mass hierarchy of the 6 bosons perfectly fit into the structure of the Zeptoform. As already discussed, inertial mass is related to the change of spin. However, the Higgs particle does not have spin. Then, how does the Higgs particle acquire mass? That will be discussed with regard to spontaneous symmetry breaking.
Spontaneous symmetry breaking.
According to theoretical physics, the most fundamental cause of symmetry breaking is considered to be spontaneous. Spontaneous symmetry breaking can be described in the following way. Imagine a keyboard, which was discussed in Section 1. Then, this keyboard is used as a seesaw, which is keeping the horizontal state. Then, you put a symmetrical dome at the center of the seesaw. Also, you put a ball on the top of the symmetrical dome. Now, this system is symmetrical with respect to the center of the dome, but the top of the dome is not flat, and thus the system is unstable. This unstableness of symmetry corresponds to that of the tritone. The tritone was discussed in Section 1. The ball rolls down from the top of the dome to one side of the seesaw, and it breaks the symmetry. One side of the seesaw goes down, and the other side goes up. It happens naturally, without any external force, and thus it is called spontaneous. As discussed in Section 1, in the minor scale, the relationship between point 5 and point 4 creates the tritone, and the unstableness of the tritone causes symmetry breaking, as illustrated in this figure. Spontaneous symmetry breaking is intrinsically related to the Higgs mechanism. The ball, at the top of the dome, represents the potential of the Higgs field. Then, point 8 absorbs the potential, which creates mass, and it becomes a Higgs particle. As already discussed, the Higgs particle is the heaviest of all the 6 bosons. On the other hand, the photon, which is represented by point 1, has no mass. Therefore, point 8 goes down, and point 1 goes up, creating the hierarchical structure of mass.
The electromagnetic force.
The electromagnetic force is mediated by photons, and the photon is represented by point 1, as illustrated. The brightness of light is determined by the number of photons. Related to this, the essential aspect of type 1 is called brilliancy, or clear light. Photons interact with electric charge, and this interaction is called the electromagnetic force. The electromagnetic force combines negatively charged particles and positively charged particles. For example, a proton has positive charge, and an electron has negative charge. These two particles are connected by the electromagnetic force to form a hydrogen atom, as illustrated. As we can see, the electromagnetic force combines negative charge and positive charge. It can be seen as the integration of yin and yang. Related to this, the essential aspect of type 1, which is brilliancy, represents the totality of yin and yang. In this figure, the warm color, which represents yang, is illustrated on the left side. On the other hand, the cool color, which represents yin, is illustrated on the right side. Warm colors have longer wavelength, and cool colors have shorter wavelength. Then, from the accumulation of all wavelengths, clear light or brilliancy emerges. It is the totality of yin and yang, and thus it is the representation of perfection. Related to this, the holy idea of type 1 is holy perfection.
Note:
Although the clear light represents the totality of yin and yang, in terms of the relationship between brightness and darkness, it represents yang. It means that, in order to represent ultimate perfection, the brightness needs to be integrated with the darkness. The integration of the brightness and the darkness is one of the main topics of this video series.
The strong force.
The strong force is mediated by the gluon, and the gluon is represented by point 5 as illustrated. The gluon interacts with color charge, blue, anti-blue, green, anti-green, red, and anti-red, and this interaction is called the strong force. Quarks have color charge, and thus the strong force can interact with 3 quarks to form a proton, as well as a neutron. Also, it can interact with 1 quark and 1 antiquark to form a meson. The types of color charge are not actual colors, but there are a lot of similarities between the system of color charge and that of actual colors. These similarities can be seen in the following way. The total color charge of a particle is always zero, and this totality is considered to be white or clear light. In the case of a proton and a neutron, the three colors, blue, green, and red, are combined. From the combination of these three colors, white emerges, as illustrated. In the case of a meson, its colors can be seen in the following way. A meson is composed of one quark and one antiquark. When a quark of the meson has the color charge of blue, its antiquark must have the color charge of anti-blue. The net charge of blue and anti-blue is zero. Metaphorically, anti-blue can be seen as yellow because the mixture of blue light and yellow light creates white, or clear light. In the same way, anti-green can be seen as magenta, and anti-red can be seen as cyan. The essential aspect of Type 5, which is called the diamond guidance, can integrate various essential aspects, which have various colors, to form a diamond structure of essence. Likewise, the gluon integrates quarks, which have various color charges, to form a nucleus. That is, the structure of a nucleus can be seen as the representation of the diamond structure of essence.
Note 1.
As discussed previously, a hydrogen atom is composed of one proton and one electron, and a proton is composed of three quarks, as illustrated. These components are integrated by the electromagnetic force of Type 1 and the strong force of Type 5. This structure represents the structure of the brilliancy diamond. That is, as discussed in Chapter 1, Section 2, the brilliancy diamond emerges from the integration of brilliancy of Type 1 and the diamond guidance of Type 5. This figure represents the function of the brilliancy diamond. The perspective of Type 1 tends to see clear light, and that is related to the function of the electromagnetic force. On the other hand, the perspective of Type 5 tends to see various colors of light, and that is related to the function of the strong force. Type 1 tends to judge based on good and bad, or positive and negative. Related to this, the electromagnetic force interacts with positive electric charge and negative electric charge. On the other hand, Type 5 tends to see many different essential colors. Related to this, the strong force interacts with various types of color charge.
Note 2.
The strong force works on the inside of the proton, connecting quarks. On the other hand, the electromagnetic force works on the outside the proton, connecting a proton and an electron. Related to this, Type 5 is an introverted type, and Type 1 is an extroverted type.
Note 3.
The Sun and the Earth are connected by the gravitational force, and the gravitational force is represented by Type 7. The solar system is much more macroscopic than the structure of a hydrogen atom. Related to this, Type 7 is more extroverted than Type 1.
The weak force.
Z bosons and W bosons are called weak bosons. They are represented by point 2 and point 4, as illustrated. Weak bosons interact with the weak charge, and this interaction is called the weak force. The weak force can change one type of particle to another type of particle. The bottom quark of the third generation can be changed to the up quark of the first generation, as discussed in Section 2. This generation change is caused by the weak force. In this generation change, the weak force changes the electric charge of the quark from negative to positive. But, according to the principle of charge conservation, the total charge of the particles cannot be changed. That is, when the bottom quark of the third generation is changed to the up quark of the first generation, the W boson, negatively charged weak boson, appears, so that the total charge remains the same. The bottom quark has a charge of -1/3, and the up quark has a charge of +2/3. Therefore, in order to keep the principle of charge conservation, the W boson needs to have a charge of -1. Among the 6 bosons, only the W boson, represented by Type 4, has electric charge as previously discussed. As we have seen, The bottom quark is changed to the up quark by the W boson. Likewise, the anti-bottom quark is changed to the anti-up quark by the anti-W boson, as illustrated. However, these processes are not perfectly symmetrical. As discussed in Section 2, there is a frequency gap between these two processes. In other words, in this case, particles and antiparticles have different lifetimes. That is related to the violation of CP symmetry between particles and antiparticles.
Note 1.
Point 4 is represented by the W boson, as discussed, but, in the case of a quark, point 4 is represented by the strange quark. The strange quark has strangeness, which is one type of quantity. The value of the strangeness can be changed by the weak force. Other forces cannot change the value of the strangeness. Coincidentally, the term strangeness represents the characteristic of type 4. That is, type 4 tends to value the uniqueness or originality of oneself.
Note 2.
Point 2 is represented by the Z boson, as discussed, but, in the case of a quark, point 2 is represented by the charm quark. The charm quark has charmness, which is one type of quantity. The term charmness represents the characteristic of type 2. That is, type 2 is considered to be the most seductive type among all Enneatypes. She tends to value a close affectionate relationship with others.
Note 3.
Some types of coincidence can be seen as synchronicity. That is, for example, when a person coins a term, such as the strange quark or the charm quark, the consciousness of this person might be receiving some kind of related information from the isomorphic field of archetypes.
Note 4.
In the case of bosons, the relationship between type 8 and type 1 represents spontaneous symmetry breaking. On the other hand, in the case of quarks, it represents the violation of CP symmetry. Spontaneous symmetry breaking creates the hierarchy of mass, including the 3 generations of quarks. Then, the weak force changes the generation of a particle from the third to the first. In this process, CP violation happens.
The strong force and the weak force.
As discussed previously, the strong force can integrate quarks to form a nucleus. On the other hand, the weak force does not integrate quarks. Instead, it changes quarks. Similarly, the insight of type 4 is less related to the integration of aspects compared to the insight of type 5, and more related to the change of one's identity. This figure was discussed in Chapter 1, Section 2. The perspective of type 5, which is holy omniscience, integrates many different types of essential colors. Related to this, the gluon, which represents type 5, integrates many different types of color charge. On the other hand, the perspective of type 4, which is holy origin, penetrates different levels. Related to this, the W boson, which represents type 4, can change the generation of particles. In this section, we have discussed the isomorphism between personality types and the 6 bosons. Chapter 2, Section 5, Forces in Physics, Part 2. In the previous section, we discussed the isomorphism between 6 Enneatypes and 6 bosons. Then, in this section, we discuss the other 3 Enneatypes. These Enneatypes represent composite particles.
The weak force and neutron decay.
In this figure, a neutron and a proton are represented by type 9 and type 3, respectively. Type 9 is a neutrovert, and type 3 is an extrovert. Related to this, the electric charge of a neutron is 0, and that of a proton is positive 1. Outside the nucleus, neutrons are unstable, and thus a free neutron changes into a proton. In this process, a neutron emits a negatively charged weak boson, so that the process can keep charge conservation. As discussed previously, the weak boson, which is represented by type 4, causes the change of identity. The process from point 9 to point 3 can be seen as the dissociation from the function of the heart. That is, the functioning mode of point 3 is characterized by the dissociation from the feeling mode. Related to this, in the process from point 9 to point 3, the weak boson, which represents the function of feeling, is dissociated. The weak boson decays into one electron and one antineutrino, as illustrated. When a particle is moving toward the past, it can be seen as an antiparticle, as discussed in section 3. Therefore, the antineutrino in this figure can be illustrated in this way. In this figure, a neutrino, not an antineutrino, is moving backward in the flow of time. This process is equivalent to the process in the next figure. In this figure, a neutron emits a negatively charged weak boson, and thus it becomes a proton. On the other hand, a neutrino absorbs a negatively charged weak boson, and thus it becomes an electron. As already discussed, the weak boson, which is represented by type 4, causes the change of identity.
Note:
Neutrino and electron are leptons, and they have 3 generations, as illustrated. These 3 generations will be discussed later. As discussed previously, the structure of neutron is unstable. Then, in the process from neutron to proton, the structure of the nucleus will be stabilized. Related to this, the hydrogen atom, which is made of 1 proton and 1 electron, is the most abundant chemical in the universe. Metaphorically, type 3 tends to use the function of an electron, that is called the covalent bond, which will be discussed later. On the other hand, type 9 tends to use the qualities of neutrino. The function of neutrino is related to the function of empathy. Empathy is the ability to see the world from the perspective of another person. With that said, in order to experience the perspective of another person, the perspective of I, or the sense of my own identity, needs to be set aside. That is the characteristic of a neutrino, as we will see.
The neutrality of neutrino.
The neutrino is so named because of its neutralness. Its electric charge as well as color charge is 0. Also, its mass is almost 0. Because of this, it is very difficult to observe the behavior of neutrinos. The neutrino is almost undetectable. Likewise, one of the main characteristics of type 9 is neutralness, and she or he tends to have a vague sense of self. Because of this, type 9 tends to have difficulty in identifying his or her own personality type. Type 9 tends to dissociate from the out and the in of the instinctive center. The former is represented by the Higgs field of type 8, and the latter is represented by the electromagnetic field of type 1. That is, the neutrino, which represents type 9, rarely interacts with the Higgs field, and does not interact with the electromagnetic field.
Note:
There are many scientists who think that neutrinos do not interact with the Higgs field at all. In that case, neutrinos do not acquire mass from the Higgs field, but from a different mechanism. In addition to these characteristics, they do not interact with the strong force because they do not have color charge. However, they interact with the weak force. In other words, neutrinos have weak charge. The weak force is represented by type 2 and type 4, and these 2 types belong to the heart center. Related to this, in the structure of the Zeptoform, type 9 belongs to the heart center, as illustrated.
Note:
Unlike other particles, the neutrino can change its identity without any external force, and that is called neutrino oscillation. When neutrinos are traveling through space, they change their generations. In other words, the neutrino oscillates its generation. The neutrino has 3 generations. They are called the electron neutrino, the muon neutrino, and the tauon neutrino. As discussed, the neutrino oscillates its identity. Related to this, the vagueness of identity is one of the most recognizable characteristics of type 9.
Composition of a proton.
In this figure, the highest level represents the component of a proton. A proton is composed of 2 up quarks and 1 down quark. These quarks are modern particles, not primordial particles. Related to the structure of a proton, the willpower of point 1 and the action power of point 7 are integrated by the insight of point 5, as illustrated. This integrated structure is analogous to the structure of a proton. Up quarks are positively charged, and the down quark is negatively charged. The former represents extraversion, and the latter represents introversion. The functions of these 3 enneatypes are encompassed by the functioning mode of type 3. Therefore, a proton can be represented by point 3. However, you might be wondering about the following. The functioning mode of type 3 includes the function of point 8, but this proton does not include point 8. The reason will be discussed later. When a proton is combined with an electron, it becomes a hydrogen atom, as illustrated. A hydrogen atom is the most abundant chemical element in the universe. As discussed previously, a proton and an electron are connected by the electromagnetic force. The function of the electromagnetic force is represented by point 1. Having said that, point 3 superposes on point 1, and thus, point 3 tends to use the function of the electromagnetic force.
Covalent bond.
2 hydrogen atoms can be connected by the covalent bond, as illustrated. The function of the covalent bond represents one of the main functions of type 3. That is the function of the pearl. As mainly discussed in Chapter 1, Section 5, the pearl works like an interface, through which we can communicate with other people effectively.
Note:
The electron has 3 generations. These are called the electron, the muon, and the tauon. Because the muon and the tauon are much heavier than the electron, they cannot exist stably. In other words, they are not used to form a hydrogen atom. However, there are some exceptions. For example, in a muonic atom, which is one type of exotic atom, an electron is replaced by a muon.
The nuclear force.
In the structure of an atom, protons and neutrons are connected by the function of meson, and it is called the nuclear force. A neutron, as well as a proton, is made of 3 quarks. On the other hand, a meson is made of 1 quark and 1 antiquark, and it represents the quality of ambivert. As already discussed, a meson is represented by point 6, and point 6 represents trust. That is, protons and neutrons are connected by trust. The function of trust is the connecting force. Although mesons are composed of material particles, they are force carrier particles. That is, mesons are not fermions but bosons.
Nuclear force and nuclear fusion.
When a neutron is combined with a hydrogen atom, it becomes a heavy hydrogen atom. It is also called a deuterium atom. The core of a heavy hydrogen atom is composed of 1 neutron and 1 proton, and they are connected by the nuclear force. A heavy hydrogen atom can be fused with another hydrogen atom, and it creates helium-3. This fusion, which is called nuclear fusion, produces massive energy, and this is what makes the sun shine. Related to this, helium is named after Helios, the Greek god of the sun. Nuclear fusion is different from nuclear fission. Metaphorically, the fusion represents integration, and the fission represents disintegration. Nuclear fission has been used for nuclear generators in our societies, and that is much more hazardous than nuclear fusion. In the case of nuclear fusion, there is no possibility of meltdown. However, the scientists on this planet have not yet created nuclear fusion reactors for practical use.
Note:
In December 2022, for the first time, a nuclear fusion reactor has produced more energy than was used to cause the reaction. However, still, it is on an experimental level, not yet for commercial use. The process of nuclear fusion can be seen as the process from point 9 to point 3. In this integration process, the trust of type 6 as the connecting force is essential. As discussed in Chapter 1, Section 7, the essential quality of Type 6, which is trust, needs to be connected to the body of truth, the heart of truth, and the mind of truth. The functioning mode of Type 3 uses the connecting force of Type 6 in order to be connected to the empathy of Type 9 and the strength of Point 8. That is, in order for Type 3 to integrate the true strength of Point 8, the trust of Type 6 is essential. This figure, which will be discussed in Chapter 3, represents the developmental levels of worldviews. In this figure, Point 3 represents the modern level, which is also called the rational level. On the rational level, our societies have created nuclear fission generators. This fission is represented by the fission between the functioning mode and the feeling mode. As discussed many times, the functioning mode of Type 3 tends to dissociate from the feeling mode. This dissociation, or separation, can be seen as the representation of nuclear fission. Then, in the process from postmodern to metamodern, and to the transcendent level, the technology of nuclear fusion generators will be invented from the perspective of holy law and holy hope of Type 3. This is the process from Point 9 to Point 3. As already discussed, the process from Point 9 to Point 3 represents nuclear fusion. With that said, in order to transform the fission of Point 3 into the fusion of Point 3, the function of Point 6 is essential, as illustrated. That is, the trust of Type 6 can be seen as the connecting force between a neutron and protons. As already discussed, a neutron and protons are connected by the nuclear force, and the nuclear force is represented by the function of Type 6. Nuclear fusion represents the fusion between the womb realm and the diamond realm. As discussed in the previous video, the fusion between the womb realm and the diamond realm represents the solution to the hierarchy problem. The hierarchy problem in our society will be discussed in Chapter 3. Chapter 2, Section 6, Hierarchy in Music, Part 1.
Consonance and dissonance.
In the C major scale, C is the first note of a musical scale, and it is called the tonic. It is the pitch upon which all other pitches are hierarchically referenced. The intervals from the tonic to the 8 notes are called the following: unison, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth. The 8th is also called octave. In this hierarchical structure, consonance and dissonance can be heard. Unison, fourth, fifth, and eighth are considered to be perfect because their sound quality has the highest degree of consonance. On the other hand, the 2nd and the 7th are dissonances. In this figure, frequency ratios of perfect intervals are illustrated. When frequencies of 2 tones are related by a small integer ratio, the sound becomes consonant. As we can see in this figure, the perfect intervals have small integer ratios. For example, the ratio of the tonic and unison is 1 to 1. Unison has no distance between the 2 notes. It means that 2 sounds of the same frequency perfectly resonate.
The perfect fourth.
The relationship between C and F is the perfect fourth, and it has a high degree of consonance. Related to this, the process from Point 8 to Point 2 is an integration process. However, in one type of music theory, which is called counterpoint, the perfect fourth is considered to be dissonant. In this case, the word dissonant does not mean unpleasant, but unstable. In order to resolve this problem, or dissonance, the next movement of the sound is required. In the case of the relationship between C and F, the latter sound needs to be moved to E, which is represented by Point 4. Related to this, the process from Point 2 to Point 4 is an integration process. In this process, the quality of Point 2 and that of Point 8 are integrated by the insight of Point 4, as discussed in Chapter 1. The process from Point 2 to Point 4 needs to be supported by the quality of Point 8, as discussed in Chapter 1. Likewise, the process from F to E needs to be supported by the tonic, which is C, and it is represented by point 8. As already discussed, when frequencies of two tones are related by a small integer ratio, the sound becomes consonant. As we can see in this figure, among the all-perfect intervals, the ratio of tonic and fourth has the biggest numbers. The numerator as well as the denominator of the ratio is the biggest. Therefore, the perfect fourth is the least consonant among the all-perfect intervals. When the consonants of the fourth and that of the third are compared, mathematically, the fourth is more consonant than the third. Therefore, the fourth is considered to be perfect, and the third is not. However, as we have already discussed, psychologically, we tend to desire to hear the shift from the fourth to the third. In terms of frequency ratios, the fourth and the sixth have the same denominator, as illustrated. It means that the combination of these two tones creates a perfectly harmonized sound. The fourth is represented by type 2, and the sixth is represented by type 7. Related to this, these two types, type 2 and type 7, tend to have a good affinity. In the C major scale, the interval between the fourth and the seventh is a tritone. As we can see in this figure, the frequencies of the fourth and seventh are related by a big integer ratio. Because of this, it creates dissonance. The fourth is represented by type 2, and the seventh is represented by type 5. Related to this, type 2 and type 5 have totally different characteristics.
The perfect fifth.
The relationship between C and G is the perfect fifth, and it has a high degree of consonance. It is more consonant than the perfect fourth. Related to this, the holy idea of type 1, which represents the perfect fifth, is called holy perfection. However, you might come up with the following question. The relationship between point 8 and point 1 is the relationship between the beast and God, and it tends to create conflicts, as we have seen in the previous chapter. Then, how does the perfect fifth represent consonants? In the instinctive center, the conflict between point 8 and point 1 tends to be experienced by type 9. Then, he or she tries to dissociate from the conflict. It represents being out of tune. In other words, the dissonance between the beast and God is experienced from the perspective of humans. That is represented by D. Related to this, the interval from C to D, which is a second, is one of the two dissonant intervals built on C. Type 9, which represents the perspective of humans, belongs to the instinctive center, but she tends to dissociate from the function of instinct, dissociating from the tonic. This dissociation represents out of tune, which creates dissonance. On the other hand, type 1 does not dissociate from the tonic. When the battle between the beast and God is played as music, it can be heard as consonant because they perfectly interact with each other. It is the opposite of out of tune. This figure was discussed in some previous sections. It represents the function of tritone, as well as spontaneous symmetry breaking. In the process of the symmetry breaking, the whole system comes to rest in a stable position. Likewise, the unstable sound of the tritone causes us to desire to create the next sound, which is a stable sound. This stable sound is represented by the perfect fifth.
The perfect chord.
The combination of C, E, and G creates the most important chord in the C major scale. It has the frequency ratio of 4, 5, and 6. The bottom note of any chord, which is formed by stacking thirds, is called the root. In this figure, C is the root.
Equal temperament.
Equal temperament is a musical system of tuning, in which every pair of adjacent pitches is separated by the same ratio of frequencies, as illustrated. This is the most dominant tuning system in modern Western music. But there is a problem with this system. In this system, the frequency ratio of C, E, and G is not exactly 4, 5, and 6. Because of this chord creates a certain degree of dissonance. The most off-balance tone is E, which is represented by Enneagram type 4. Related to this, according to Riso and Hudson, type 4 tends to experience the following dissonance.
Human beings are spiritual animals, occupying an uneasy place between two orders of existence.
That is the relationship between the beast and God, or the root and the fifth.
4 sense both sides of their potentially conflicting natures, and they suffer intensely, or are ecstatic because of them, fusing personal conflicts and divergent feelings into art.
Such as the creation of music. In this figure, we can add the following processes. The process from point 1 to point 2 and to point 4. These are integration processes. As discussed previously, the perfect fourth needs to be moved to the third in order to create a more stable sound. When the fourth is shifted to the third, we can hear the most important chord of the C major scale. As already discussed, it has the frequency ratio of 4, 5, and 6. As discussed previously, in the case of equal temperament, the most off-balance tone is E, which is represented by Enneagram type 4. On the other hand, in the case of just intonation, which is another musical system of tuning, the frequency ratio of C, E, and G is exactly 4, 5, and 6, which produces the perfect consonants. Just intonation was created through the process of finding the best frequency of E, which is represented by type 4. However, this system has a different type of problem. Suppose you tune the C major scale in just intonation. Then, if you modulate the key from the C major scale to another type of scale, the system becomes out of tune. Her-mode tuning is a solution to this problem. This is a technology which can automatically control the tuning system of electronic keyboard instruments in real time. In analogy, the perspective of type 4, which is related to self-realization, needs to be flexible like this technology. We need to be able to change our perspectives about our identities in conjunction with each context of reality.
The perfect eighth.
In this figure, point 3 represents 1 octave above the tonic, and it is called the perfect eighth. The frequency ratio of the tonic and the eighth is 1 and 2. It is more consonant than the frequency ratio of the tonic and the fifth, which is 2 and 3. Related to this, the functioning mode of type 3 tends to utilize the quality of type 8, which represents the function of the tonic. Because the perfect eighth has a high degree of consonance, it can be used to solve the problem with many different types of dissonance. In a diatonic scale, there are 2 dissonant intervals, the second and the seventh, as illustrated in this figure. Related to this, type 9 as well as type 5 needs to experience the process toward point 3 in order to be connected to the quality of the tonic. The process from point 9 to point 3, as well as the process from point 5 to point 3, is an integration process.
Note 1.
As we can see in this figure, in the case of the seventh as well as the second, the ratio has big numbers, and thus, their sounds become dissonances. The ratio of the seventh and that of the second have the same denominator, which is 8. It indicates that they have a similar tendency. Type 9, as well as type 5, has the tendency to dissociate from the function of instinct, dissociating from the function of the tonic.
Note 2.
Because the interval from C to B is a dissonant interval, the process from point 8 to point 5 is a disintegration process. In this process, an intellectual psychopath tends to emerge, as discussed in Chapter 1. This figure was discussed previously. In this process, the tritone causes us to create a stable sound, which is the perfect fifth. However, this ascending process does not stop at the perfect fifth, because the perfect eighth creates a more stable sound than the perfect fifth. In other words, the hierarchical structure of the zeptoform further evolves upward to point 3. This is the process from point 1 to point 7, to point 5, and to point 3. These processes are all integration processes, as already discussed. Point 3 represents the intrinsic motivation for evolution, that is related to holy law and holy hope.
The supreme vertex.
In the process of ascending, which is the process from point 4 to point 1, point 4 is changed to point 1. Then, point 1 goes up to the supreme vertex. Initially, the combination of point 8, point 4, and point 1 is C, E, and G. It is the most important chord in the C major scale, but, in the ascending process, it is changed to C, G, and E. In music theory, these two chords are considered to be the same chord. They are different variations of the same chord. C-E-G has the frequency ratio of 4, 5, and 6. On the other hand, C-G-E has the frequency ratio of 2, 3, and 5. In this ratio, the ratio 4 is missing. This missing ratio is supplied by adding the second C, which is 1 octave above the root, and it is represented by point 3. Point 8 and point 1 represent the beast and God, respectively. Then, the beast and God are integrated by the functioning mode of type 3. This frequency ratio can be used as a solution to the unstable sound of a tritone. It will be discussed step by step. As discussed many times, the tritone creates an unstable sound. Also, when point 2 moves to point 1 and point 5 moves to point 7, the unstable sound is emphasized. Related to this, these processes are disintegration processes. In order to solve this problem, point 2 needs to move to point 4, and point 5 needs to move to point 3, as illustrated. These processes are integration processes. As we can hear, the problem with the unstable sound has been solved. Then, in order to create a more harmonized sound, we can add the following process. As we have discussed previously, in the ascending process to the supreme vertex, point 4, as well as point 1, goes up, as illustrated. Because of this ascending process, after the process from point 2 to point 4, there is the process from point 4 to point 1, as illustrated. On the other hand, in the process from point 5 to point 3 is connected to the sound of point 8. That is, as discussed many times, the functioning mode of point 3 is intrinsically connected to the function of point 8, which is the tonic, or the root. Now, as illustrated in this figure, we can hear the frequency ratio of 2, 3, and 4. Then, point 1, as well as point 3, goes up to the supreme vertex. In this process, the frequency ratio of 2, 3, 4, and 5 emerges. This frequency ratio creates a highly harmonized sound.
The point diamond.
As already discussed, in the minor scale, the interval between point 4 and point 5 represents tritone, but, in the major scale, the interval between point 4 and point 5 represents perfect fifth. Related to this, as discussed in Chapter 1, the processes between point 4 and point 5 can be experienced as disintegration processes as well as integration processes. In the integration processes, the insight of type 5 integrates the insight of type 4, from which the point diamond emerges. The function of the point diamond was mainly discussed in Chapter 1, Section 2. The function of the point diamond can be used to deepen the process from point 5 to point 8, as well as the process from point 4 to point 1. In this figure, These processes are illustrated in the structure of the Enneagram. When, these processes are illustrated in the Zeptoform. The grounding process and the ascending process emerge. The ascending process is going up to the supreme vertex. These algorithmic processes can be played as music. The most basic pattern of the Zeptoform music begins with the sound of the primordial tritone. That is related to spontaneous symmetry breaking, as discussed in Section 4. This tritone is repeated 3 times, and it causes the violation of CP symmetry, which is the creation of the hierarchical structure of the beast and God. Now, we will listen to it. Chapter 2, Section 7, Hierarchy in Music, Part 2. In this figure, we can see the process of centering, grounding, and ascending. These processes can be represented by musical notes. Part A represents the centering process, Part B represents the grounding process, and Part C represents the ascending process.
Part A.
Part A is the centering process. This process is represented by the most important chord in the Dorian scale. When we consider only white keys, the Dorian scale, or the Dorian mode, is the scale from D to D, as illustrated. Then, the combination of D, F, and A is the most important chord of the Dorian scale. This combination is represented by Type 9, Type 2, and Type 7. These 3 types belong to the positive outlook group, as discussed in Chapter 1. In the Dorian scale, point 9 represents the root. Then, the interval from point 9 to point 2, as well as the interval from point 9 to point 7, can be experienced as an integration process, as discussed in Chapter 1. These 2 processes are not included in the traditional Enneagram theory, as illustrated in this figure. In this figure, point 6 is not included in the musical scale. Point 6 represents the position of the listener of the Zeptoform music. Therefore, it is not included in the musical scale. Then, in order to merge into the music, the process from point 6 to point 9 needs to be experienced. That is the experience of the centering process. While point 6 represents a listener, point 9 represents the sound field, which is called the phonon field. It will be discussed step by step. In this figure, on the keyboard, point 9 is located at 2 different points. These 2 points, do not represent two exact points, but the harmonious expansion of the field. That will be discussed from here. As mainly discussed in Section 4, Point 1 and Point 8, represent the photon and the Higgs particle. Then, Point 9 as a boson represents the phonon. The phonon is a quasi-particle. A quasi-particle behaves like a particle. It is a quantum of sound waves. A quantum is the smallest amount of any physical quantity. The phonon is produced from the sound field, and it communicates the sound force, which may bring harmony. Related to this, in the Zeptoform theory, the holy idea of type 9 is harmony and empathy. As illustrated in this figure, type 8, type 9, and type 1 are related to kinesthetic, auditory, and visual. The Higgs particle is located in the kinesthetic field. The Higgs particle is the quantum of the Higgs field, and the Higgs field produces mass. It can be experienced by the kinesthetic perception of our bodies. In terms of music, it is related to a low-pitched, massive sound. The photon is located in the visual field. The photon is the quantum of the electromagnetic field. It can be experienced as light by the visual perception of our eyes. In terms of music, it is related to a high-pitched, light sound. The phonon is located in the auditory field. The phonon is the quantum of the sound field, or sound waves. It can be experienced by the auditory perception of our ears. Point 9 represents the harmonious expansion of the sound field. That is, when the function of point 9 is activated on the essential level, it includes the massive sound of point 8 as well as the light sound of point 1. That is the process of grounding and ascending.
Note:
The relationship between the 9 enneatypes and the 3 perceptions, kinesthetic, auditory, and visual, will be discussed in Chapter 4.
Part B.
The shift from Part A to Part B is the shift from the centering to the grounding. It is the shift from the Dorian scale to the major scale. That is, the tonic is shifted from D to C, or 9 to 8. It happens through the process from point 2 to point 4, as mainly discussed in Chapter 1. In this process, point 9 is connected to point 8, and this connection represents the grounding. In this figure, a standard 88-key piano is illustrated. In the grounding process, the frequency of the root goes down from C4 to C3 to C2 and to C1. C4 is also called middle C, and it can be seen as the main reference point of the keyboard. Within one octave, the interval from C to D is dissonant. However, the interval from C1 to D4 is consonant. This interval belongs to a harmonic series. A harmonic series is the sequential sounds, in which the frequency of each sound is an integer multiple of the lowest frequency, which is the tonic. In this figure, C1 is the tonic. The interval from C1 to D4 is the 9th overtone, as illustrated. At the end of Part B, point 9 as the 9th overtone is connected to point 8 as illustrated. The 7th overtone is missing in the standard pitch scale. It is one type of the blue note, which is a slightly different pitch than standard pitches. It is used in jazz and blues. In this figure, the closest pitch to the 7th overtone is the pitch of the black key between point 7 and point 5. It is called A sharp or B flat. A sharp and B flat have the same pitch, but they are used in different contexts. When the pitch of B is lowered by a half step, it is called B flat, and it is also called the blue note. On the other hand, when the pitch of A is raised by a half step, it is called A sharp. A sharp sounds brighter than B flat, and in the Zeptoform theory it is called the yellow note. Related to this, the essential color of point 7 is yellow, and that of point 5 is blue.
Part C.
The shift from part B to part C is the shift from the grounding to the ascending. In this process, the frequency of the supreme vertex increases. In the beginning of part C, two different processes are combined. One is the process from point 9 to point 7, to point 5, to point 3, and to point 1. The other process is the process from point 9 to point 2, to point 4, and point 1. When the two processes are combined, the functioning mode and the feeling mode are integrated. Then, the frequency of the supreme vertex goes up, as illustrated. As we can see in this figure, the combination of C, E, and G, which is the most important chord of the C major scale, is repeated.
The hierarchy problem.
As already discussed, by experiencing the processes in this figure, we can integrate the functioning mode and the feeling mode. However, in these processes, the hierarchy problem, which was discussed in Chapter 1, tends to emerge. That will be discussed step by step. Point 9 represents an infant. Then, she or he experiences the process from point 9 to point 2, as well as the process from point 9 to point 7. Then, the process from point 7 to point 5, as well as the process from point 2 to point 4, needs to emerge. However, as discussed in Chapter 1, if we have no experience of the authentic qualities of point 6 beforehand, the process from point 2 to point 4 does not happen. In this case, the combination of point 2 and point 5 is created. As we already know, the combination of point 2 and point 5 represents a tritone, which creates an unstable sound. As we can hear, the ending, which is a tritone, sounds incomplete. Then, because of this unstable sound, the dissociation from the quality of point 2 tends to occur in order to avoid this unstableness. This is the experience of the functioning mode. The experience of the functioning mode is an unhealthy way to avoid negative feelings, which is caused by the tritone. This avoidance, or dissociation from the feeling mode, is one type of hierarchy problem. In order to solve this problem, which is related to the tritone, we need to use the perspective of point 6, through which we can activate the perspective of point 4. As discussed in Chapter 1, the authentic qualities of point 4 can be awakened from the perspective of point 6. Then, we can integrate the feeling mode and the functioning mode. Now, we will listen to the solution to the problem. As we have seen and heard, the frequency ratio in this figure can be used as a solution to the unstable sound of a tritone. Now, we will listen to the sound of Part A, Part B, and Part C. Chapter 2, Section 8, Theory of Everything, Part 1. A theory of everything is a hypothetical theory in physics, which integrates everything, including the four forces, the electromagnetic force, the gravitational force, the strong force, and the weak force. There are some candidates for a theory of everything, and superstring theory is considered to be the best by many scientists. According to this theory, any elementary particle is not a particle, but a tiny string called a superstring, which has the shortest possible length. This shortest possible length is called the Planck length. Then, the smallest possible time interval is called the Planck time. 1 Planck length is the shortest possible length. 1 Planck time is the smallest possible time interval. These units can be seen in the following way. The passage of time and the movement in space are not continuous, but discrete. Discrete means individually separate and distinct, such as a broken line. In 1 Planck time, light travels 1 Planck length, or a photon travels 1 Planck length. The universe was created from the void. Then, after 1 Planck time passed, the universe was 1 Planck length in diameter. At that moment, it had the Planck density and the Planck temperature. The Planck density is the highest possible density. The Planck temperature is the highest possible temperature. When the space had the Planck density and Planck temperature, a particle had the heaviest mass, which is called the Planck mass. This heaviest particle is called the Planck particle. When the string vibrates 1 time in 1 Planck time, it creates the Planck mass. That is, the string becomes the Planck particle. The Planck particle is a hypothetical particle. Because the Planck particle has the heaviest mass, it becomes a tiny black hole and disappears instantaneously by radiating its energy, called Hawking radiation. Therefore, no elementary particle can have a larger mass than the mass of the Planck particle. The Planck particle is represented by 0.8. Also, the Higgs particle is represented by 0.8, as discussed in Section 4. Then, there is a fundamental question in physics.
Why is the Higgs particle much lighter than the Planck particle?
This question is called the hierarchy problem. According to the standard model of particle physics, the Higgs particle should have a mass, which is close to that of the Planck particle, but, in reality, it has a much lighter mass than that of the Planck particle. That is the problem. This problem can be solved in the following way. As already discussed, the hierarchy problem is the following question.
Why is the Higgs particle much lighter than the Planck particle? Or, why is the Planck particle much heavier than the Higgs particle?
The Planck mass is the heaviest possible mass of an elementary particle, and that is approximately the same as the mass of the Planck particle. Then, the question is,
why is the Planck mass so heavy?
The Planck mass is related to the inverse of the strength of the gravitational force. That is, as the gravitational force gets weaker, the Planck particle gets heavier. In other words, if the gravitational force is very weak, the Planck particle becomes very heavy. The gravitational force is the weakest force of all forces, weaker than the weak force. This is the reason as to why the Planck particle is much heavier than the Higgs particle. However, you might be thinking the following.
How is the strength of the gravitational force related to the inverse of the Planck mass?
The Planck particle has the heaviest mass, and thus it becomes a tiny black hole and disappears instantaneously by radiating its energy, called Hawking radiation, as previously discussed. Therefore, no elementary particle can have a mass, which is larger than that of the Planck particle. Having said that, we can consider the following situation. As discussed in Section 4, the gravitational mass and the inertial mass of any object are the same, but let's suppose these masses can be different. The equivalence principle can be violated. That is, when the gravitational force in the universe becomes stronger, only the gravitational mass of a particle becomes heavier. In this situation, the Planck particle becomes a tiny black hole faster than before, because of the larger gravitational mass, and it disappears before it gets a larger inertial mass. In this way, the Planck mass and the gravitational force are inversely related. The gravitational force is represented by type 7, and the Planck mass is represented by type 8. The action of type 7 brings about flexible action, flying in the sky. On the other hand, the action of type 8 brings about firm substantive action, grounding to the earth. In this way, type 7 and type 8 are inversely related. As we have seen, because the gravitational force is the weakest force of all forces, the Planck particle is very heavy. It is much heavier than the Higgs particle. However, this solution creates another problem. That is,
why is the gravitational force much weaker than other forces?
That will be discussed, step by step. According to superstring theory, there are open strings and closed strings, as illustrated. All particles are open strings, except the graviton. That is, the graviton is the closed string. Strings are vibrating in the 11-dimensional spacetime. Open strings move within the 10-dimensional spacetime, but closed strings exceed this limit and move in the 11-dimensional spacetime. That is, the graviton, which is a closed string, has the highest degree of freedom. Related to this, type 7, which represents the graviton, represents flexibility and freedom. This characteristic of the graviton is considered to be one possible solution to the hierarchy problem. As already discussed, the graviton goes into the extra dimension. Because of this, the effect of the gravitational force spreads into the extra dimension. The strength of the gravitational force is diluted. This is the reason as to why the gravitational force is much weaker than other forces. Consequently, because of the inverse relationship between the gravitational force and the Planck mass, the Planck particle becomes much heavier than other particles. This is the creation of the wide range of mass hierarchy. The gravitational force, hierarchical levels, and freedom are all related, as we have seen. Point 7 represents the gravitational force as well as the graviton, and the graviton does not have mass. Therefore, it is free from its gravitational force. The gravitational field creates the hierarchical levels of mass, and point 7 represents the freedom from these hierarchical levels. Without hierarchy, or force, the freedom from hierarchy, or from force, cannot be represented. Point 7 represents the number of basic elements for creating diversity, as discussed in Chapter 1, Section 3. That is, freedom, or liberty, tends to create diversity, including the diversity of hierarchical levels. For example, economic liberty tends to create hierarchical levels of wealth, as we will see in Chapter 3.
The three phases of the Planck particle.
As discussed in the previous section, in the grounding process, the frequency of the root goes down from C4 to C3 to C2 and to C1. C4, which is called middle C, represents the Higgs particle. Then, C3, C2, and C1 represent the three phases of the Planck particle. As already discussed, the Planck particle is the heaviest particle of all elementary particles. These three phases will be discussed, step by step. First, the process from phase 1 to phase 2 represents the Planck era. That is the beginning of the universe. During the Planck era, which has the Planck time, there was only one unified force, which is called the superforce. At the end of the Planck era, the gravitational force was separated from the superforce. Because of the creation of the gravitational force, the Planck particle acquires gravitational mass. When the Planck particle of phase 2 is considered to be the tonic, the graviton represents the seventh overtone, as illustrated. As already discussed, the seventh overtone is a slightly different pitch than standard pitches. In other words, the seventh overtone is not restricted in the standard framework. Related to this, as discussed in this section, the graviton goes into the extra dimension. Other particles cannot go into the extra dimension. In this context, the entrance to the extra dimension is represented by the seventh overtone. Therefore, all black keys, which represent the extra dimension, are all represented by point 7. As we can see, there is the isomorphism between music theory, particle physics, and personality type theory.
Note:
As discussed in this section, strings are vibrating in the 11-dimensional spacetime. Open strings move within the 10-dimensional spacetime, but closed strings exceed this limit and move in the 11-dimensional spacetime. That is, the graviton, which is a closed string, has the highest degree of freedom. Related to this, type 7, which represents the graviton, represents flexibility and freedom. Next, in the process from phase 2 to phase 3, the Higgs field was activated. Because inertial mass is produced by the Higgs field, the Planck particle can acquire inertial mass, which is called the Planck mass. When the Planck particle of phase 3 is considered to be the tonic, the Higgs particle represents the 8th overtone, as illustrated. As we have seen, the 7th overtone is represented by 0.7, and the 8th overtone is represented by 0.8. Then, the 9th overtone is represented by 0.9. The 9th overtone is represented by the relationship between the Planck particle and the phonon. As we have seen, the Planck particle is represented by 3 different positions, but, for the sake of simplicity, these 3 positions can be superposed. In this figure, 0.8 as Planck particle represents the superposition of the 3 phases.
The creation of the universe.
As already discussed, at the beginning of space and time, the Planck particle was created. Then, the process from 0.8 to 0.7 can be seen as the Planck era. During the Planck era, which has the Planck time, there was only one unified force. It is called the superforce. At the end of the Planck era, the gravitational force, which is created by gravitons, was separated from the superforce. Because of this separation, the superforce became the grand unified force. Next, the strong force, which is created by gluons, was separated from the grand unified force. Because of this separation, the grand unified force became the electroweak force. Next, the Higgs field was activated. Because of this activation, weak bosons, Z and W, acquire mass from the Higgs field. It indicates the separation of the weak force from the electroweak force. Because of this separation, the electroweak force became the electromagnetic force, which is created by photons. The processes in this figure are all integration processes. That is, the algorithmic processes of the Enneagram theory perfectly represents the creation process of the 4 forces and the Higgs field. However, without using the structure of the Zeptoform, this correlation cannot be found. As discussed in this section, when the string vibrates one time in one Planck time, it creates the Planck mass. That is, the string becomes the Planck particle. Mass, charge, and other properties of a particle are determined by the vibrational state of the superstring. It is like a musical instrument. In the same way, the Zeptoform represents a musical instrument. That is, each point of the Zeptoform represents a different type of vibrational state. Because of this, the Zeptoform can be used to create music. Chapter 2, Section 9, Theory of Everything, Part 2.
Supersymmetry and dark matter.
The universe has more mass than the total mass of ordinary matter. This excessive mass in the universe originates from hidden matter, called dark matter. It is invisible because dark matter does not interact with photons, which are the quantified elements of light. Some scientists think that superstring theory can be used to identify dark matter. The word super in superstring indicates supersymmetry. That is the symmetry between fermions and bosons, or material particles and force carrier particles. The isomorphism between fermions and personality types was mainly discussed in Section 2, and between bosons and personality types was mainly discussed in Section 4. Supersymmetry is the integration of these two groups. For example, a quark has a squark as its supersymmetric partner. The former is a fermion, and the latter is a boson. In the same way, a photon has a photino as its supersymmetric partner. The former is a boson, and the latter is a fermion. With that said, dark matter might be made up of supersymmetric particles. Then, in analogy, what are the supersymmetric partners of personalities? They are the dark side of personalities, and they are called shadows. In this section, we will see how we can discover the dark side of our psyche. Supersymmetric particles have much greater mass than ordinary particles. Having said that, in order to discover heavier particles, scientists need to create a lot of energy. That is one of the reasons why it is difficult to find supersymmetric particles. Scientists have not yet discovered a supersymmetric particle. In the same way, people have difficulty in finding supersymmetric aspects of their psyche. But the influence of these aspects is not negligible. Related to this, in this universe, the total mass of dark matter is much greater than that of ordinary matter. In this figure, we can see the 6 types of bosons. Then, in the next figure, the 6 bosons and their supersymmetric particles are illustrated. As already discussed, supersymmetric partners of bosons are fermions, and fermions are material particles. Therefore, they can be seen as the candidates for dark matter. In the simplest versions of supersymmetry theories, a particle and its supersymmetric partner have the same mass. However, because of spontaneous symmetry breaking, which was discussed in Section 4, supersymmetric particles have much greater mass. Therefore, in terms of the hierarchy of mass, their relationship can be illustrated in this way. Then, the Planck particle, which was discussed previously, is located at the bottom. The Planck particle is the heaviest particle of all elementary particles.
Note:
This figure was already discussed. The brightness at the top and the darkness at the bottom need to be integrated in order to experience true perfection. It represents the integration of shadows. As already discussed, supersymmetric partners of bosons can be seen as the candidates for dark matter. However, not all of them are considered to be dark matter. Dark matter is dark because it does not interact with light. In other words, supersymmetric particles as dark matter should not have electric charge. In this way, we can narrow down the candidates for dark matter. A particle and its supersymmetric partner have the same electric charge. The W boson has electric charge, and thus, its supersymmetric particle also has electric charge. That is, the we know, which is the supersymmetric partner of the W boson, is not a candidate for dark matter. By using the isomorphism between elementary particles and enneatypes, we can further narrow down the candidates for dark matter. As discussed in the previous chapter, according to the Enneagram theory, the sleeping state of point 9 is considered to be the core of all mental problems. Because of this, analogically, the shadows of type 9 can be seen as dark matter. It will be analyzed step by step. Shadows can be divided into 2 major categories. One is called attachment shadows, and the other one is called avoidance shadows. Attachment is fixation, addiction, philia, grasping, etc. On the other hand, avoidance is alienation, allergy, phobia, rejecting, etc. Type 9 tends to be allergic to the out and the in of the instinctive center, or the beast in God. These elements are represented by type 8 and type 1. Also, type 9 tends to be addicted to the quality of a mother, which is represented by type 2. In terms of particles, these 3 types are represented by the photon, the Z boson, and the Higgs boson. Then, the supersymmetric partners of these 3 particles are superposed to create a new type of supersymmetric particle, which is called the neutralino. With that said, surprisingly, the neutralino is considered to be the primary candidate for dark matter. The neutralino is so named because of its neutrality of electric charge as well as color charge. Type 9 is the archetype of neutrality. The neutron, the neutrino, and the neutralino are all represented by type 9. Point 9 represents the sleeping state, as discussed many times. According to the Enneagram theory, the sleeping state of point 9 is considered to be the core of all mental problems. Almas said,
"The Enneagram of specific delusions is grounded in the delusion of point 9. In other words, each of the other 8 delusions can be seen as based on, or arising out of, this fundamental delusion. In some sense, your specific difficulty cannot be completely understood or resolved, until you resolve the specific difficulty of point 9. Similarly, your specific reaction cannot be worked through fully, until you resolve the point 9 reaction, which is that of falling asleep."
In order to wake up from the sleeping state of type 9, we need to integrate the dark side of our psyche, that is represented by the discovery of neutralinos. In this chapter, music theory, physics, and personality type theory are all integrated into the Zeptoform. In this integration, we use the algorithmic processes of the Enneagram theory as well as the Zeptoform in order to see the developmental process of the universe. Then, in the next chapter, these algorithmic processes are used to see the developmental process of our society as well as politics.